My stepdaughter shouted, "Get out," per pensionier, when I entered her close family wedding party. Her mom, my wife, asked me to go with her. I smiled and went back home. My wife said I should have ignored her and just stayed for her sake. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you how everything unfolded. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to John Adams from Ohio. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. Retirement didn't feel like I thought it would. I imagined slow mornings, radio humming in the background, maybe even a little gardening in the afternoon sun. What I got instead was silence. Not peace, silence. My days were mostly filled with routine. Toast and black coffee at 6, a walk around the block at 8, a crossword puzzle I rarely finished by noon. At 67, I was neither frail nor senile, just a man quietly navigating the final chapters of his life, living on a pension that paid the bills and not much else. I lost my first wife to cancer 6 years ago, and both my sons lived states away, busy with children I barely knew. So when I met Layla at a mutual friend's backyard barbecue 2 years ago, her laughter was like a jolt to the chest, warm, bright, unexpected. We married after a year. I thought, maybe this chapter would be different. Layla came with her own past, a polished woman in her late 50s with a confident stride and a home that smelled like jasmine and ambition. She had one daughter, Melissa, who was already in her 30s and deeply embedded in her own high-powered world of clients, curated dinner parties, and social media followers. From the start, Melissa barely tolerated me. She called me Mr. Safe once, not to my face, but loud enough in the kitchen for me to hear. I never corrected her. I figured the distance between us didn't need a bridge, it needed respect. And I was willing to wait for that, even if it never came. So when Layla approached me that Friday afternoon, cheeks flushed with excitement, asking if I'd come with her to Melissa's wedding party the next day, I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to support her, but because I knew, deep down, that I wasn't truly welcome there. "It's just close family," she said, tugging gently on my arm. "She didn't invite many, but you're my husband. I want you there." Her voice softened on the last sentence, like she knew she was asking for more than she let on. I smiled, touched her hand, and said yes. I even laid out my best gray slacks and pressed the shirt I'd worn to our courthouse wedding. Simple, clean, respectable. The next day was brisk for spring, the air sharp but the sky clear. As we approached the venue, a rented garden space tucked behind a modern hotel, I felt the first twinge of unease in my chest. I wasn't nervous exactly, just aware. Aware of the stares, the whispered greetings, the subtle glances at my shoes or my plain tie. Layla squeezed my hand as we stepped inside, and for a moment, I thought maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe Melissa would surprise me. She did, but not in the way I hoped. The garden was draped in cream and soft gold, chairs aligned in symmetrical rows, and delicate glass lanterns hanging from trellises overhead. A string quartet played near the back, their bows moving in perfect unison, and the scent of roses mingled with whatever hors d'oeuvres the servers were carrying on polished silver trays. I stood just behind Layla, watching her glow as she greeted guests, many of whom looked like they had stepped straight out of a lifestyle magazine. I wasn't uncomfortable, exactly. Just misplaced. Like a comma in a sentence that didn't need one. We hadn't even fully crossed the lawn before Melissa spotted us. She was standing in a cluster of people, laughing with a champagne flute in hand, her dress something sleek and backless that shimmered when she turned. Her eyes landed on her mother first, and then shifted to me. The smile slipped from her face so quickly it could have been an editing error in a movie. Her nostrils flared just a bit. She didn't move to greet us, didn't even wave. Layla, either unaware or pretending to be, tugged me gently toward her. "Let's say hello," she whispered. I followed her, my feet heavier with each step. Melissa didn't wait for us to come closer. She took a single step forward, voice sharp and loud enough to slice through the ambient music. "Get out," she said. "Get out, poor pensioner." Her words hung in the air like smoke, drifting slow and poisonous. A few people gasped. Someone near me actually laughed, then stopped, unsure whether they were supposed to. Layla froze beside me. My ears burned, and my face felt suddenly too exposed under the afternoon sun. I looked directly at Melissa. Her face was a mask of contempt, mouth curled in disdain. There was no humor, no hesitation, just raw dismissal. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask why. I didn't look to Layla for explanation or support. I knew in that moment that nothing I could say would make a dent in the wall Melissa had built around herself. So I smiled, not because I was amused, but because it was the only shield I had left. A quiet, tired smile that I reserved for moments when my dignity felt like the only thing I could still afford. "I'll see you at home," I said to Layla, touching her elbow lightly. She didn't move. She didn't speak. Her lips parted, but no sound came. I turned and walked away. I don't remember much of the walk home. I must have passed dozens of people, traffic lights, children playing, dogs barking, but it all melted into a kind of white noise. My body moved on instinct, my mind replaying the moment like a cruel highlight reel. I thought about the way Melissa's voice cracked like a whip, the way no one stood up, the way Layla said nothing. That last one stung most of all. Not the insult, not even the laughter, it was her silence, her stillness. Like I wasn't worth the trouble of a defense. When I reached my front door, I stood for a moment on the porch, staring at the brass handle. My hand shook slightly as I reached for it. Inside, everything was the same. My slippers by the shoe rack. The faint scent of the stew I'd made 2 nights ago. The slow tick of the wall clock I hadn't bothered to replace. I took off my jacket, folded it carefully, and placed it over the back of the armchair. Then I sat. Not because I was tired, but because my legs no longer felt steady. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat there, letting the weight of the day settle onto my shoulders like an old coat I'd worn too long. In some strange way, I felt relieved. The truth was out. Melissa had said what she'd always felt, hadn't she? No more pretending. No more subtle jabs at family dinners. No more fake smiles. She had ripped off the curtain in front of everyone. And as painful as it was, at least now I could stop hoping. Hope was exhausting. Layla came home late. I heard her key turn in the lock sometime after 10. I didn't get up. I didn't even turn on a light. I heard her heels click softly across the hardwood, pause in the doorway, then retreat to the bedroom. She didn't call my name. She didn't ask if I was okay. And I didn't go after her. We slept in silence, backs turned, a gulf between us wider than any insult could ever carve. The days that followed passed slowly, like honey poured from a cold jar. Layla moved around the house as if walking through fog, present but distant, quiet but not quite absent. She made coffee in the mornings without asking if I wanted any. She left the house in silence and returned with grocery bags that she unpacked without comment. I kept to myself mostly, reading the same page in a book over and over again, unable to focus. There wasn't a single argument. No door slamming, no raised voices. Just an oppressive quiet, like we were both waiting for the other to be the first to crack open the seal of discomfort and let it all come spilling out. I suppose I expected an apology. Maybe not from Melissa. She had made her stance loud and clear, but from Layla. I thought she might come to me, cup my face in her hands and say, "I'm sorry. That should never have happened." Or even just a whispered, "You didn't deserve that." But nothing came. Just the occasional look from across the room. The kind you give a stranger when you're not sure if you recognize them or not. Every time our eyes met, I felt smaller. Not because I needed her approval, but because I had counted on her to protect my place in her world, and she hadn't. On the 4th night after the wedding, I finally spoke. We were in the kitchen. She was washing dishes, her back turned. I sat at the table, hands folded, staring at the grooves in the wood. "You didn't say anything," I said quietly. My voice sounded foreign in the room, like it didn't belong. She paused, her hand submerged in the soapy water. "I didn't want to make a scene," she replied, still facing the sink. I waited for her to turn around. She didn't. "She humiliated me," I said, more firmly now, in front of everyone. "And you said nothing." She turned then, slowly, drying her hands on a towel. Her eyes were tired. "I was shocked," she said. "I didn't expect it. And I didn't want to ruin her day." I stood up, the chair scraping slightly against the tile. "But you were okay with letting her ruin mine?" I asked. There was no venom in my voice, only sadness. That's what made it worse. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I just thought, you could have stayed. For me. Ignored her. You've always been the bigger person. The words landed like weights on my chest. I laughed softly, bitterly. You don't get to ask me to swallow my pride after watching your daughter spit on it, I said. Being the bigger person doesn't mean being invisible. She flinched slightly, but didn't respond. We stood in silence again, the distance between us thick and heavy. Finally, I walked past her, out of the kitchen, down the hall, and into the guest room. I slept there that night and the next, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed air. I needed space to remember who I was before I began shrinking to fit into her life. That week, I thought often about my late wife. She'd been kind, grounded, the sort of woman who would have faced down a bear if it meant protecting her family. I wondered what she would have done if she'd seen someone treat me the way Melissa had. I knew the answer. She wouldn't have smiled politely and turned away. She wouldn't have prioritized social appearances over human decency. The comparison wasn't fair, maybe, but it was honest. By the end of the week, Layla and I barely spoke. She looked sadder than before, more fragile somehow. But still, she didn't apologize. She didn't say the words I needed to hear. Maybe she thought I would get over it. That time would soften the sharp edges of my humiliation. But some things don't dull with time. Some things etch themselves into your bones. So I waited. Not for her, not for Melissa, but for myself, to decide what I was willing to accept and what I wasn't. Because love without respect is just proximity. And I was tired of being close to people who only saw me when they needed something. It was exactly 8 days after the wedding party when the knock came as sharp and rushed, like whoever stood behind the door wanted help but didn't quite want to ask for it. I was in the living room, seated in the same recliner I'd occupied most mornings that week, with the television on mute and a cold cup of tea beside me. I heard it once, then again, and I didn't move right away. Something in me bristled at the sound. I already knew, somehow, that this wasn't a neighbor dropping off a misdelivered package or someone trying to sell me a new energy plan. No, this knock had nerves stitched into it. Desperation. And something worse, expectation. I opened the door and found Melissa standing there. Her hair was up in a messy bun, no makeup on, face pale and tied around the eyes. She looked nothing like the flawless bride I'd seen a week ago, standing like royalty in her golden dress while she dismissed me like a servant. Today, she wore a hoodie and jeans, and for the first time since I met her, she looked small, vulnerable, human. I didn't invite her in. I simply stood in the doorway, waiting. She didn't smile or greet me. She just sighed, rubbed her forehead, and said, "I need your help." I didn't answer right away. I just watched her. It wasn't that I didn't want to speak. I just wanted to give myself time to process the irony thick in the air between us. She looked past me, maybe expecting to see her mother, maybe hoping for backup. When she didn't, she shifted uncomfortably and said, "It's about the deposit for the new place. We were supposed to get a transfer from his cousin, but it fell through, and I wouldn't be here if I had another option." Her voice cracked slightly, the tiniest fissure in her armor. But it didn't move me. Not this time. I leaned slightly against the frame, arms crossed. "You need money," I said flatly. She nodded. "And you thought to come to the poor pensioner for that?" I asked, not mocking, not angry, just quiet and clear. Her face twitched at the mention of her own words. She opened her mouth to speak, probably to say she didn't mean it, or that she was stressed, or that it had been taken out of context. But I raised one hand, gently, to stop her. "No excuses," I said. "You said exactly what you felt. And now you're here, not because you value me, but because I'm convenient." "I was upset," she said, finally, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think you'd take it so personally." That made me laugh, not loudly, but bitterly. "You told me to get out. In front of your friends. Called me a poor pensioner like I was filth under your shoe. And now you want to pretend like it was nothing personal?" I stepped back just a bit and let the silence stretch between us. "That says more about you than it ever did about me." She looked down at the concrete, chewing on her bottom lip like a scolded child. "I made a mistake," she muttered. "We all do." But I shook my head slowly. A mistake is spilling wine on a guest shirt. A mistake is forgetting a name. What you did was a choice. You chose to humiliate me. You chose to strip away whatever fragile bond we might have had. And for what? Applause? Validation from people who couldn't care less about you 5 minutes later. My voice didn't rise. I didn't need it to. The truth spoke loudly enough. Then I said the words I'd been holding in since the moment she'd opened her mouth that day. I would have helped, but I'm just a poor pensioner, remember? I didn't wait for a reaction. I didn't look for remorse or watch her squirm. I stepped back and slowly closed the door, not with anger, but with intention. A boundary. A line drawn not in sand, but in concrete. Inside, the silence felt different now. Not oppressive, not sad. Just clean. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I sat down, picked up my cold tea, and took a sip. Bitter, but honest. Just like that moment. I didn't tell Layla about the visit right away. Not because I was hiding it, but because I wanted to see if Melissa would. She didn't. The next 2 days passed quietly, Layla going about her business, unaware that a moment of reckoning had taken place just beyond our threshold. And even if she had known, I don't think I would have regretted a single word. Layla found out on the third evening, and not from me. I was in the kitchen peeling an orange when she came home, her voice already taut with unease. She set her purse on the counter and didn't even take off her coat before asking, "Why didn't you tell me Melissa came by?" I didn't flinch. I just continued peeling, the citrus scent blooming between us like some bright, silent witness to the discomfort swelling in the room. "Because it wouldn't have changed anything," I said calmly. She didn't come to apologize. She came to collect. Layla leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. Her eyes were narrowed, not in anger but in a kind of wounded confusion. "She said you turned her away, that you were cold, that you mocked her." I met her gaze then. Not to intimidate or argue, but to make sure she heard every word that came next. I reminded her of her own words. That's all. If that felt like mockery, that's on her. I set the peeled orange on a plate, slid it across the counter, then washed my hands without waiting for her reply. The running water filled the silence. "You know she was desperate," Layla said, softer now. "You know how hard things are for her right now." I dried my hands slowly, methodically. Then I turned and said, "And where was that same grace for me when she told me to get out of her close family wedding? Where was your concern for how hard things were for me then?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room itself seemed to lean in, waiting. "You stood there," I continued, silent, "while your daughter humiliated me. And now you want me to pretend it never happened because she needs something?" Layla's eyes were glassy. She blinked slowly, as if trying to recalibrate her reality. "I thought you were bigger than that," she whispered. "I thought you were the one person in this family who wouldn't let pride get in the way." That stung more than I expected. Not because she was wrong, but because she still didn't understand. "This isn't about pride," I said. "It's about dignity. Mine. Yours. Hers. You want me to give, even when I've been given nothing but contempt. That's not noble. That's foolish." I stepped past her then, not out of anger but necessity. I needed space to breathe. She followed me down the hallway. "So that's it?" she asked. "You're just cutting her off?" I stopped, turned around, and looked her in the eyes. "I'm setting a boundary," I said. "And if you want to frame that as cruelty, that's your choice. But don't ask me to finance someone who wouldn't share a table with me. Don't ask me to extend a hand that's only ever been slapped away." We slept in the same bed that night, but it felt like opposite corners of different planets. She didn't touch me. I didn't reach for her. In the morning, she left early, and I didn't ask where she was going. The house felt quieter than usual, but this time the silence didn't suffocate. It felt earned, like a stillness I'd chosen rather than endured. Later that week, a mutual friend told me Melissa and her husband had to delay their move. That the landlord wouldn't hold the new place without a full deposit. That she'd been calling around, desperate. I listened without comment, not because I was unmoved, but because I'd already made peace with my decision. You can only extend yourself so far before you become a doormat, and I'd spent too many years confusing patience with permission. That evening, I sat in the living room again. No television, no books. Just me and the fading light through the curtains. I thought about the man I used to be. The one who kept his head down, who didn't want to rock the boat, who believed that if you just stayed kind long enough, people would come around. That man had been exiled from a wedding he was invited to. That man had been told he was lesser in front of a crowd. And that man had still considered helping the person who did it. Until he finally realized that some doors deserved to stay closed. The house was quiet again, But the silence had changed its shape. It no longer crouched in corners or pressed against my chest like something waiting to pounce. It simply was a presence, a calm one, like rain gently tapping on windows at night. I found peace in small rituals. The careful folding of laundry, the sound of toast popping up in the morning, the way the light filtered through the blinds at exactly 7:15 each day. There was comfort in knowing I could move through the world on my own terms again, without the tightrope walk of managing other people's expectations. No apologies. No second-guessing. Layla stayed distant for a while. Not cold, not hostile, just muted. She cooked dinner but didn't ask me to sit. She watched her shows with the volume low and never invited me to join. We lived side by side like strangers renting the same space. I wondered, sometimes, if this was the end of something. If that sharp moment at Melissa's wedding had cracked the foundation of what we had built together. But when I really thought about it, I realized the cracks had already been there. The wedding was just the flood that found them. 3 weeks after the wedding party, Layla finally sat down beside me in the den, clutching a mug of tea she never drank from. She stared at her hands for a long time before speaking. "She says I've chosen you over her," she murmured. I didn't reply. I waited. But the truth is, I didn't choose anyone. I froze. I didn't know what to do. And I failed both of you. Her voice was thin, brittle like dry leaves. I nodded slowly, letting the moment breathe. "It's not about choosing," I said. "It's about standing up when it matters. That night, I wasn't your husband. I was a guest you were too embarrassed to defend." She looked like she might cry, but she didn't. Instead, she nodded, wiped under her eye once, and said, "I don't want to lose you." My chest tightened, but I kept my tone steady. "Then understand this. My dignity is not a price I'm willing to pay for a seat at someone else's table. If being part of your daughter's life means swallowing insults and playing the grateful outsider, I'll pass. I've lived too long and seen too much to beg for scraps of respect." We didn't hug. There was no dramatic music. Just a quiet agreement that some lines shouldn't be crossed again. She didn't argue, didn't try to fix it, just sat beside me in that still room. And for the first time in weeks, we shared the silence as equals, not out of tension, but understanding. Melissa never apologized. She didn't write, didn't call. Part of me hoped she would, if only to test whether time had softened me. But it hadn't. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I simply knew now what I hadn't fully accepted before. Some people mistake kindness for weakness, and some families aren't made of blood or vows, but of mutual respect. Without that, you're just a group of people orbiting the same pain. A month later, I was walking home from the grocery store when a neighbor I barely knew waved at me. "Still got that easy smile, huh?" he said. I laughed, surprised at how natural it felt. "Takes less effort than a scowl," I replied. He nodded, satisfied. I realized then that I was lighter. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. I had chosen myself, quietly, without fanfare, and that choice was enough. Now, when I think back to that wedding, I don't feel shame. I feel clarity. I stood, walked out, and never looked back. Not because I was weak, but because I finally understood the cost of staying. And some things, like dignity, are worth more than any check I could have written. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your support helps bring more real, raw stories like this to life, stories about family, dignity, and standing your ground when it matters most. See you soon in the next one.